Good, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. These are the Chapter 4 Learning Targets with your host, Drew Dodds. And so this is what's going to be on your test tomorrow. Chapter 4 test. It's going to be all broken up by learning targets. It's going to be a lot of multiple choice, some matching, and I can't say exactly how many questions, and I can't say that I'm not going to put any short answer or fill-ins on there. You need to know your stuff. Now, to help you know your stuff, you have this video, okay? And you have the learning target sheet that we're working with, the same one that you see on the screen. You also should have connective tissue notes 4.4. Those are also on Google Classroom. You will also have um, a Chapter 4 quiz. You'll see a link to that on here, which you'll probably notice if you found this video. It'll be Chapter 4 quiz. Since you guys did not get those returned to you because it was a class set, we did it on a bubble sheet, I'm going to have the Chapter 4 quiz on here with answers. So that would be a good study guide too. There's going to be a lot of the pictures that you had on your Chapter 4 quiz. You're going to see those again. Okay, so you're going to have to be able to label those. All right. So, learning target 4.1, I can identify the four major types of tissues of the body and describe their roles. So you guys should all have the answers out in front of you because you presented this information or you were presented to and then needed to present it yourself. I wouldn't be surprised if you could just say the answers off the top of your head, really, right? Did you guys hear that? Can you say that again for me, Chance? Not so loud, though. I think they heard you over at John Glenn. Ah, very good. So I'm going to stand over here. Is there a way you guys need to just memorize them, or is there any trick, anything you have to remember for this, or just know them? Oh, it does, doesn't it? It looks kind of funny. You'll have to forgive my drawing. And this could actually be on the later learning target 4.7. That is about neural tissue. Okay, so if we're identifying it, if you're identifying by what it looks like, again, those pictures, so we're going to have to label epithelial tissues, we're going to have to label different types of connective tissues, we're going to have to label different types of muscle tissue, and we're going to have to be able to label neural tissue. As an introduction, by the way, I don't want to forget this, but you should know in the introduction section, you should know that histology is the study of tissues. Okay, histology is the study of tissues. You should know that. When I describe these, just briefly in 4.1, just introducing these four different tissue types. We start with epithelial, and we say that epithelial cells and epithelial tissue line surfaces inside and out, right? They do. They have a lot of other functions that we're going to talk about on the other learning targets. So we have some more learning targets. Not everything is going to be put right here in this one learning target. Connective I'm going to leave, I usually leave to last because I explain epithelial line surfaces inside and out. What's special about muscle? Movement, right. How does it move? Retracts, is that the word? Contracts, right. Right. Which means they can shorten, right? Okay, and when muscles are attached to bones, to our skeleton, they can move the skeleton, which makes us move. Neural tissue can transmit electrical impulses. It is because it's communication, right? Messages. And then connective gets left for last. And because really I say we have epithelial tissue that does this, we have muscle tissue that does this, we have neural tissue that does this. Connective tissue is like all the rest of the stuff, like the filler, and I'm not sure that's a very good term for it. It is structural though. Okay? And yeah, supports, yeah. And you got to be careful with supports though, because you could say that about some other things too. You could say that about muscle help support too, as well. That's what it would be, right? And if we didn't have bones, we would still collapse into a mess of muscle and connective tissue. What? What's that, Trent? Does connective tissue connect? How so? How? What do you guys think? Why don't we think? We'll leave that as a question. Does it connect? And then when we get to that learning target, let's talk about it. Deja? Okay, so that's going to be the beginning. That's learning target 4.1. Very simple, very basic. Okay? Right. We're going to get a little more complex as we go through the chapter here. Okay, learning target 4.2. I can describe the types of epithelial tissues and their functions. So we know epithelial tissues, they line surfaces. There are 6 types that you're responsible for. Okay, so we have 3 simples and 3 not simples. What does simple mean? Simple means 1 layer. Okay? All right, so the other 3 are not 1 layer. They're not going to be 0 layers, so they must be more than 1 layer. Okay? All right, so we've got our 3 simples. Simple, why is that there? We have our 3 simples, and then we're going to put, for the 3 simples, we're going to put down the shapes. What are the shapes that we can have? We can have squamous. What does that mean? Flattened, right. So 3, we can have squamous, flat. We can have what else? Cuboidal, cube-shaped. Columnar, which is column-shaped. Good. Okay. So our 3 not simple. So we could go right along with this list of shapes, kind of, and say stratified, but this is where there's a little bit of a change. Like we can say, out of the 6 types, did we study stratified squamous? Yes. Okay, so we have stratified, which means, sorry, I should have asked you the question, but stratified, which means more than one layer. So we can identify epithelial types by the number of layers. We can also identify them by the shapes of the cells that make up the tissue. We can identify them by being simple, one layer, or stratified, more than one layer. We can identify them by cell shape, by being flattened, squamous, cuboidal, or columnar. All right, so we did talk about stratified squamous. All right, did we talk about stratified cuboidal? There is stratified cuboidal, but we didn't. We kind of substituted something else. We put in transitional, which kind of, at times when it's together, it looks kind of like it's stratified cuboidal anyway. We didn't do stratified columnar either. What did we do? Pseudo-stratified, which means fake stratified. And it's actually pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar. I didn't write all that, though, for the sake of space. All right? Now, I don't want to say too much about functions here because, as you guys know, when we get to Learning Target 4.3, it's very similar in terms of talking about the functions of these different types of epithelial tissues. But I will say, I guess, what are they most important for? So with tissues, if you remember from the notes, from the epithelial tissue notes, I put PS. But really, it's like P's and S's. There's two P's and two S's in terms of functions of epithelial tissues. Do you guys know what one of the P's would be? Protection. Okay? What about the other P? Well, secretion was one. That's one of the S's. Do we know the other P? Permeability, which means that things can pass through sometimes, depending on the tissue. Right, yep, that kind of goes here, right? In 4.3. What about the other S? Any idea? Sensitivity. Okay? All right, so simple squamous, that's our good permeability one. And I'm going to write down diffusion. Okay? So one of the most important things in our body is diffusion of gases, like breathing in oxygen. How do we get that oxygen to our bloodstream? How do we get CO2 in our bloodstream out of our body? Okay? So if we go down to the tiniest parts where this happens, it's called the alveoli of the lungs. And that's something I would put as an example for that. Alveoli in lungs, you should know that you would expect to find simple squamous there. Okay? For simple cuboidal, let's keep it simple. Literally, just secretion glands. That's all I want you to think about there. Simple columnar, I want you to think about absorption. And one area where that would be very important would be associated with the digestive system. Okay? So if I ask about a type of epithelium that's closely associated with the digestive system, I want you thinking simple columnar. Stratified squamous. So there's kind of a trade-off between, well, I won't talk about that yet, but stratified squamous, I want you to think protection. So this would be like our skin is stratified squamous. Think about entrances and exits. We want those to be protected. They go through a lot. Transitional, I just want you guys to think of its ability to stretch and associate it with the bladder. Bladder stretches, right? And pseudostratified columnar, I want you to think of that as cleaners. And think about it being associated with the respiratory tract. So where we have gases flowing through, we want to have these epithelium, these cleaners. There's other types though. All right, so when we go with form and function, so this is what you started to say, Chance. So simple squamous, good for diffusion, permeability. Okay, that makes sense because we have one layer, just one layer of cells. And on top of that, not only do we have one layer of cells, but they're also flattened. So does it make sense that gases would be able to pass across a membrane that consists of simple squamous epithelium? It does, right? One layer of flattened cells. All right. For simple cuboidal, all I want you guys thinking about is secretion and glands, and like I said, transitional, just ability to stretch, and the bladder. Okay. For simple columnar, this has a very important feature that you should know. Anybody know what the special feature is on simple columnar? Microvilli, right. So we have microvilli, which are these finger-like projections. And what's special about microvilli, finger-like, increase surface area for absorption. More surface area, more absorption can take place. Okay? Stratified squamous. So we said protection, which when we have many layers of flattened cells, it's not really our scales, but it's kind of scale-like, which makes sense why that would be good for protection. Okay? And the pseudostratified ciliated columnar, again, ciliated. Okay? Cilia are hair-like projections, which makes them good sweepers and filters, which makes them good cleaners. And again, remember that we're going to have to identify pictures of different types. The same pictures that were used on our Chapter 4 quiz. Okay, they're going to show up again on this Chapter 4 test. Remember to take a look at that. All right, can I erase this? Thank you. All right, which takes us to 4.4. Pretty extensive learning target here. So again, the pictures, you had pictures of different types of connective tissues on your Chapter 4 quiz. Make sure you've got those down. All right. So I just want to kind of put it this way. You should know that connective tissues consist of specialized cells. They consist of protein fibers and a ground substance of some sort. So based on these characteristics of connective tissues, when we had our lab and we were trying to identify different types of connective tissues under the microscope, that's what we were looking at. Did they have cells of a certain type that were distinctive that we could notice, hey, it's this type of connective tissue? Or did they have visible protein fibers? Yes or no? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. If they did, maybe those helped us identify what type of connective tissue it was. Could we tell what kind of ground substance it was? All right, so these are all things that we looked at in trying to understand the different types of connective tissue. Okay, it's not. Are you sure? Where would it fit in? Okay. All right, so we have three main categories of connective tissues. We have the connective tissue proper, the CTP. Okay. The CTP can be broken down further into two categories. We can have loose connective tissue and we can have dense connective tissue. All right, loose connective tissue is going to be areolar and adipose. Adipose really just fat. Whereas dense, anybody know what dense would be? Sounds tough, doesn't it? Sounds like it'd be tough. You remember the examples we did? What we had like in our slides, which ones were dense connective tissue? Ligament was one, and what was the other one? And tendon, okay? What's the second category here, main category? Fluid, okay, and what do we have for fluid? We have a couple examples there. Blood and lymph. Good. And the last category, supporting. And what fits in here? Cartilage and bone. Okay. Again, we see these examples popped up on the slides, on the examples that you had to identify things, right? All right, 4-6. Muscle tissues. What kind of muscle tissue do we have? We have cardiac. Oh, really? What kind of song you got? Okay. So cardiac is heart, right? On the heart. What about the smooth muscle? Where would we find that in the body, do you think? All over the place, really. But there is one thing I want you to think about. Think digestive. Skeletal, what's special about that? voluntary movement, right. And it moves because skeletal is muscle attached to bone, to the skeleton, right? Therefore, it is skeletal muscle. And what you just said, Trent, it is voluntary. We can choose to move our bones, which makes movement. I can choose to wave my arms around and kick my legs like this. I can choose to act like this if I want. Okay? Free will, right. What about the heart? Can we choose our, like, can we just, hey, I want to slow my heart down for a little bit and think about it and slow my heart down. Hey, check this out. I'm going to stop my heart real quick. No, right? We don't. So, cardiac muscle is involuntary. We do not consciously control that. And so is smooth. We don't, you know, oh man, ate too much food. I shouldn't have done that. I'm on a diet. I did this yesterday. It's terrible. I ate too much food. Oh, I'm going to just digest it real fast. There it goes. Can't do that. Um, I went to the Lions game, so I was stress eating. All right. The other thing I like to talk about is it striated or not? Because based on voluntary and involuntary and striated and non-striated, we can identify these different types. Striated means a striped appearance, okay? Due to the fibers found there and their arrangement. All right, so striped appearance. You guys know, is cardiac muscle tissue striated? It is. What about smooth muscle? So we call that non-striated. And skeletal muscle? So based on just these two categories of things, we can identify what we're talking about. Is it striated? Yes. Okay, well, I know it's either cardiac or I know it's either cardiac or skeletal. Is it voluntary or involuntary? Voluntary. Now I know it's skeletal. Okay? Is it striated? No. Oh, must be smooth muscle then. All right. Is it involuntary? If it's involuntary, well, it's either cardiac or smooth. Okay, and then we say it's striated also. Oh, cardiac. All right. What happened? So we are getting toward the end of class, but looks like we're okay. We're at our last learning target, and it's pretty easy here. Neural tissue. So, um, you guys made a comment earlier that it is very distinctive. Okay, very distinctive looking. Yes. Okay, and the thing we notice about this is we do have dendrites. That's where stimuli comes in or messages from other neurons. We have the axon taking the message out. So messages looking at this neuron would be going this way. We'll talk more about that when we get to nervous system. Also mentioned to me was that, this is from my last class, but They have neural glial cells, or neuroglia, which are support cells. Okay, and then like we mentioned earlier, transmits electrical impulses, messages, really, and it's important to note that they do it quickly as well. To hold on your fun fact just for a minute, their chance. Do you guys know what other body system also transmits messages through the body? Endocrine, right? And so endocrine doesn't work with the electrical impulses, though. It works with hormones, chemicals that are traveling through the body. So it's longer term, slower, much slower. Um, but nervous system, quick now, what we got to do. All right. So I believe that's it for that. All right. And that's it for chapter 4, what we're covering.